Hi, this is Bruce May. I'm the Chief Content Officer for the ISRC, and I have David Baxter with me today. He is a procurement consultant and expert in PPPs, and he is also the senior advisor to the International Sustainable Resilience Center. So he's a colleague of mine. Welcome, David. I know that you've just come back from the Istanbul PPP Center of Excellence annual conference. I was looking at the takeaways from that event, and based on what I was reading, I assume that you are a believer in the future of PPPs. Would you?
Thank you, Bruce, for inviting me. Yes, with the current pandemic and also with global change or climate change events that are occurring, PPPs have been placed under considerable stress. Due to less users, for example, which has resulted in revenue problems for them, or damage to them, for example, by extreme climate events such as we've seen in the United States in the last year, from fires to floods to earthquakes to almost any natural resource that could inflict some sort of form of damage. The result of that has been that there are a lot of skeptics out there who are saying that PPPs don't really have much of a future. But I was fortunate enough last week to attend the Istanbul PPP Center of Excellence annual conference, the 6th one that I've attended, where I also served as a co-chair of the conference. And this is one of the premier PPP events where ISRC was lucky to be able to be represented. And we talked with experts from all over the world who talked about the experiences about PPPs, what it was like to initiate PPPs or carry them on during the pandemic, and also adverse weather events or climate change events, depending how you wish to call it. And the feeling that I had that definitely there isn't a sense that PPPs are doomed or they've passed, they've served their purpose. In actual fact, there were many people there who feel that PPPs are increasingly becoming important because there's a funding gap that governments just can't afford anymore to build critical infrastructure, and therefore partnerships between the public and the private sector are critically important. This wasn't a lightweight conference. It was attended by participants from over 40 countries, all of them PPP experts or PPP practitioners. And they all felt that, there is a specific role for PPPs. The speakers included representatives, former employees of the World Bank, the G20 Global Infrastructure Hub, importantly also the World Association of PPP Units and Professionals, WAP, and then our organization. And many ideas were exchanged, many thoughts were shared, concerns were shared, and new best practices that are emerging were shared. And so, the takeaway statement from it is that the 23 countries that participated, the 100 representatives who were there, all felt that PPPs are still relevant, and that we are facing a situation, where we are actually looking at re-examining how we deliver PPPs, and I suppose, in effect, rebooting the way PPPs are implemented globally.
So do you feel like a lot of the best practices and ideas around innovation and the nature of relationships between the public and private sector will address the concerns of those people that have been doubting the role of PPPs?
Yeah, I think so. Or I don't even think so, I know so. Because one of the great things about public-private partnerships is that it brings the public and the private sector together, where they can leverage their resources, whether it's institutional knowledge that the public sector might have about certain infrastructural services, to the private sector, which can introduce alternative financing and which can also introduce innovation. I mean, we have to be honest in many cases that the public sector is not always a great source of innovation because its employees are tasked with doing things the way they have to according to the rule books. Yet the private sector has to be innovative because it's in a very competitive world and is always seeking new solutions and new ways of doing things. And so they bring this to the table, and it brings tremendous value to the private sector as well as the public sector if these collaborations exist. I think what's important, which we're looking at, for example, with the Biden agenda now, with the big infrastructure bill, that unless there are strong partnerships between the public and private sector, the bill is not going to move forward, because the government can't do it on its own. It's going to need partnerships with the private sector. And just earlier this week, on Monday, I think it was in the Washington Post, there was an article that was published, which was very interesting, and it stated that the skills and the skill sets and the opportunities that let's say the skill sets that are needed for these opportunities are lacking. And so unless the public and the private sector come together in performing PPPs, and there's a vast range of them, from very simple partnerships to very complex contractual ones, unless they do this together, many of these big initiatives are going to be dead in the water. They're not going to deliver. There's going to be a lot of disappointment. And, why not engage the private sector? The private sector will employ millions of people to engage nearly, $1.2 trillion worth of funds that have been made available. And, this is an opportunity for all parties to shine and do things well.